We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. It's Thursday, March 19th, 2026, and today we're going to be talking about the worst possible solution, and that's government, because when you're a hammer, everything seems to look like a nail. In the case of our government, they're putting lots of holes in the wall, just trying to find things to bash, and that's going to be in New York City, which is going broke, trying to provide for all the homeless people. The United States Postal Service remains in the red despite the precautions that they've taken. We're ignoring China to fight against Iran and now possibly Cuba. The Washington Post is very concerned that the SAVE Act, if it passes, will hurt Republicans. We'll dig into that. Another communist is running for Congress, and there's an anti-fraud task force being stood up out of the White House, and they didn't see fit to talk to the preeminent premier law enforcement agency for the United States. Let's get after it. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's a saying, but it's very true. I believe there's actually been some sociological studies on it where you hand a kid a hammer and just tell him to walk around the house, and inevitably he will just start bashing things because you just want to use that tool. I remember being an RA when I was in college, a resident assistant, basically like sort of a supervisor kind of guy, right? And we were doing our rounds in the evening time, over the weekend when people tend to get a little bit out of hand. And there was actually one of the students had a medical condition who had passed out in the stall of one of our bathrooms. He was on the ground and we were trying to get to him. The door was locked, but you could see his legs under the ground, and we didn't know what sort of condition he was in. We didn't want to yank him out of there because you never know, maybe he's got a neck injury. And one of my compatriots ran off because he had a toolkit and he thought, we can use my tools. I can't wait to use my tools to unlock this door. And then as soon as he left, I reached in my pocket and pulled out a quarter and used it to unlock the door. When you get focused on using the tool, you kind of miss the obvious solutions. So through that vein, we will look at a bunch of different topics from all across the news landscape today. And I want to begin at the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness. And the Washington Post, being a DC-centric newspaper, news outlet, they really like to dunk on their rival, which is New York City, but they've got a pretty good reason to do it in this case. So the headline, and it's an opinion piece, comes from their editorial board: "Spending more money on homelessness isn't helping. Tip me over with a feather." Well, you could actually, if you actually dig into the amount of money that New York City spends on homelessness. The New York City Department of Homelessness, for those who don't know, has a $4 billion budget total. $4 billion, because they have some sort of crazy consent decree that they signed 40 something years ago. And it says that if you go to New York City, they must care for you, whether or not you live there or not. You could be a housed person, as they categorize them, or an unhoused person, because we don't want to offend the bums. But they are spending right now, not just the $4 billion, but specifically to the unhoused, to the homeless. They're spending over $81,000 per homeless person. Only 9% of the budget is actually dedicated to homeless people in their Department of Homelessness, because a lot of people are just living in shelters. They have to house them all. But the specific figures that are pointed out here, again, in the WAPO's opinion piece here from their editorial board, New York City spent $81,705 per unsheltered homeless person last year. Now, the median household income in New York City is $81,228, which is slightly less than the amount of money that they spent on the homeless people. which would mean, again, hammer in search of a nail. We got to use this department with $4 billion in its war chest that we stole the money from our citizens. I mean, tax them in order to do. They could have just cut a check to those homeless people and they would have been middle class in New York City. Do they look like they're middle class? Do the benefits really stretch that far? Of course not, because anytime the government gets involved with finances, it's a leaky bucket. You're gonna have to shave off a piece here and a piece there. We gotta make sure that we're paying the salaries of those government bureaucrats, turning on the lights, make sure we have paper clips and printer cartridges, and it never actually gets where it's intended to go. But we have to rely on government. No, no, we really don't. And I understand New York City is its own municipality. They can get into that. But typically, the way that we understand functionality within government and interactions with citizens in a traditionally American context is get out of my way. Why are you involved in homelessness? But specific to a communist enclave like New York City, that shouldn't surprise anybody. But let's get to some more broader issues because who here in the AmRad Pod audience, available on YouTube and Rumble and later today at Spotify, all under the @AmRad Pod moniker, who cares about New York City? Let's see the territory. They elected a communist. We don't care. Let's talk about things that affect us in the rest of America, actual America. So, from New York Times, at one point, a newspaper, they broke the news. Things are not going well at the U.S. Postal Services because the Postmaster General has now appealed for help because his outfit has a financial disaster afoot, and he's asking Congress to lend them some aid. So, how bad are things actually for the U.S. Postal Service? And again, in an age where we have UPS and FedEx, the FBI uses FedEx. They don't even trust the post office. That's a one government agency not trusting another government agency. So in an era where we have all these private delivery systems, why, stunningly, is the government lagging behind? Well, because it's government. Their goal is not really to turn a profit. They don't care about being efficient. How much money they're actually losing us as a country right now. So a couple years have gone by. They've got some track record because under the Biden administration, they were going to turn it all around, right? Right. They came out with this whole plan. What was it called? I wrote it down. Yeah, it was the Delivering for America plan. And I'll recap that in a second. But the last couple years, they've lost about $9 billion each year. 9 billion last year, 9.5 billion the year before that. They're on track to lose about 6 billion this year. So it's kind of like the way that we look at inflation. I guess they can brag about how they're losing money at a slightly less of a rate than they have been, but still in the red. And David Steiner, he's the Postmaster General, says, hey, we need to be able to borrow more money. We need to be able to jack up the stamps. We got to get out of the red. But like I alluded to, the Delivering for America plan under the Biden administration, it came out like 4 or 5 years ago, and they couldn't wait to tell us how they were going to fix the problem, right? If they were the solution, they were the solution we were all waiting for. And I will put the link in the show notes because I've talked about it a couple of times, but it's worth just some of the high points for the solutions that your government entity came up with in order to solve the problem that it itself caused by losing billions of dollars. How many billions? Well, they lost $160 billion at that point. And to turn it around, the solution was let's spend $40 billion to invest in ourselves. So spend more money in order to save money. They were going to build brand new delivery centers for themselves. They were going to have a 100% electric vehicles by this year, which I don't think they're on track for, but I did see a photo of the latest vehicle coming out of the post office. Here it is. It looks like an aardvark. If you happen to be listening, you have to flip us on here on the AmRad Pod. We're only about 9-10 minutes into the show, but that is one of the ugliest vehicles possible. And the Deliver for America plan also said that they wanted to move all of their future retirees to Medicare because they couldn't actually have any sort of health program for them. So they were going to rely on the American taxpayer to finance health care for their employees. So it was looking really great and swimmingly under the Biden administration. And certainly they haven't done a course correction. The current postmaster general is saying, yeah, things are bad. We probably are going to ultimately have to spend more money or charge the American people more money. Again, I don't know why we even need a post office at this point. Have a robust delivery system right now. If you go to Amazon and order something, it can be at your house in like an hour for an extra surcharge. They don't use the post office. So why is it existing? Well, I mean, it's a government solution. People need to get junk mail. So let's solve it by spending oodles of money and losing billions every single year. And every time the government does that, it actually makes the problem worse, which we repeatedly go in over and over again. So, out of the context of homelessness and mail delivery, people are feeling the pinch on one particular area, and that is healthcare. So, there was a recent poll that came out of Gallup. There's actually two different polls that dug into just how bad things were, and I went and dug up some of the results, and it's going to be difficult to see, but I'll throw it up there for the visual. It's trade-offs that people were willing to pay or forced to pay in order to finance their health care. So the headline that you should know is that 1/3 of Americans are engaging in some form of going without in order to finance their health care. And that's going to be in the form of prolonging a prescription or borrowing money, skipping meals, driving less, cutting back on utilities. And there's also a category for people who engaged in one or more of those categories. And that eventually gets you to 1 out of 3 Americans because healthcare costs are incredibly expensive. And why would that be? Because government's involved in healthcare. I mean, I know it's not listed in our social compact and our pesky, dusty documents. It doesn't say that the government is supposed to provide medical care or health insurance for the American citizenry. But the presumption has been because it is an easier and far better route to get to power and authority to say the word yes rather than no, that our elected betters and our appointed betters are saying, well, the government shall provide this for you. It's not there. It's not part of your charge. It's not included in coining money, signing treaties, protecting the border, defending us against fraud and force. And yet, somehow, they've been able to look into the invisible ink on the back of the Declaration of Independence, part of that good and plenty clause, and say, yes, indeed, we will tax money from the citizens or print it out of thin air in order to provide these sorts of services. And now that the American people have become addicted to these accoutrements, to these bennies, these welfare systems, well, now people rely on it. And they're only going to expand. I mean, we're talking, a dozen years since Obamacare got launched, not since it was signed. It was signed in like 2009, 2010, but it finally was going to get kicked off the ground. That was how they made the money work. They said, oh, we're going to tax some money for a few years, and then the 10 years, it'll actually be a zero-based, no increase to the deficit. But you were providing a plan for 6 years and financing it for 10. The numbers didn't add up. That was the debate at the time. So we're about 12 years since Obamacare launched, healthcare.gov. We have a Republican president. The Republicans swept into power after Obamacare passed, right? Repeal it. And then we didn't get any repeal. John McCain stood up there and gave the thumbs down because the Republicans just wanted to put their name on it because they could do a much better job. And that's going to include prescription drugs. And one of the big things that people were going without, or at least they were dragging out their prescriptions and saying, look, I only got enough for 30 days. Maybe I'll take one every other day and stretch it out to 60 days. We all done that, right? Or I'm not going to use all my antibiotics, even though I'm supposed to. Otherwise, it results in super bugs being produced. Well, I'll just take it for a few days. And once I'm feeling better, I'll just save it for later. That way I don't have to go back to the doctor to get a new prescription for amoxicillin. Well, the Trump administration has stood up Trump RX because the dude's got to put his name on everything. And piece is a little bit dated. It's back in February, so a little bit over a month, but it's about the launch of TrumpRx.gov. Headline: Trump launches TrumpRx.gov, branding his push to lower prescription prices. So this is an actual website. People of all income levels have reported putting off life events such as changing jobs, pursuing additional education. Pharmaceutical companies have now agreed to list their drugs on TrumpRx.gov, which officially say they will connect shoppers to discounts offered by companies and allow them to print coupons that they can use to purchase medications without using insurance. TrumpRx doesn't actually sell prescription drugs, though. It's like this third-party website. So let me get this straight. Our government takes money from us in the form of taxation, not theft, it's totally taxation, justifiable, legal, constitutional. Or they print money, or they borrow money, which our kids are going to have to pay back plus interest, in order to create a website that Mark Cuban already built, because our president wants to put his name on it, so that you can go to a government website and print off coupons for drugs that you can just go to the pharmaceutical company's website and get the exact same rates for? How is that fixing the problem? How is this a solution at all, let alone the optimal solution? Wouldn't the optimal solution be the government not printing money or stealing it, I mean taxing it from you, so that you had more money in your pocket to begin with, so that you could be able to afford the prescription drugs and wouldn't have to skip meals or stretch out your prescriptions as they currently exist or avoid driving? That would mean that there would be more money in your pocket to begin with, and you wouldn't have to go without those sorts of lifestyle accoutrements in order to afford medication that is necessary for your very own survival. Always a hammer in search of a nail, particularly when you can put your name on the hammer. That's always a problem. And one of the big things that our president is actually really uber excited about to put his name on. He wants to be a peacetime president. He wants to be a wartime president, but we can't call it war, so it's a kinetic operation. How dare you call me a stewardess? I'm a flight progress coordinator. But our president right now is possibly putting boots on the ground in Iran. Not possibly. It seems to be the course of action that is afoot. It's coming in the next couple of weeks. And President Trump was just recently asked about it. So real quick, this is from within the Oval Office, quick video clip. President Trump asked about the possibility of fear of escalation. Could this be your Vietnam, sir?
Mr. President, in Iran, because the Iranian regime has told Sky News, if you put boots on the ground in Iran, it will be another Vietnam. Are you afraid of that?
No, I'm really not afraid of anything.
Well, we know that's not true. Donald Trump's really, really scared of germs. That's why he told everybody to stay home and stay safe and shut down their non-essential businesses that they use to feed their family and pay their mortgages and wait on their government stimulus checks. But that's just me having a pesky memory that can recall far back as 2020. But I want to talk about boots on the ground in Iran. So this is a piece from ABC News. Headline: Deployment of Marines to the Middle East raises specter of ground trips in Iran. So this is the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, the MEU. I'll have to ask George Hill a little bit more about this unit. But from what I've been able to glean, it's a little over 2,000 Marines, and they're going to likely be used to conduct raids along the Strait of Hormuz to seize it back because of all the oil that's typically going through that area. It's like 20% of the world's oil. So the 2,200 Marines would limit any operation longer than a raid because they do raids. They don't occupy. And there's not actually a logistical pipeline behind them, a tail that's going to allow them to remain ashore. These guys are normally doing like the amphibious assault, or the helicopters are bringing them in and they seize a beach and then they're out of there. They're not looking for like a long-term occupation. And these guys are coming from Japan. It's going to take them a couple weeks to get there. What are they typically doing in Japan, though? Well, they've been training with the Japanese. I believe they also train with the South Koreans. They're there as a deterrent for North Korea and for China. So we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. We're going to pull this elite force, from what I understand and from what I've been reading. Like, these are pretty squared away dudes. Certainly if you're doing like helicopter insertions. Like, that's not just like regular Marines. And apologies if you're a Marine. And I think these guys are probably like a higher tier, but correct me if I'm wrong in the comments or in the chat. We're taking 2,200 of these Marine Expeditionary Unit guys from a place where they're currently occupying. So they're a deterrent from the Chinese, which I think is probably a more significant geopolitical rival than Iran. But we're going to send them over to Iran. So now we've robbed Peter to pay Paul, made one area which might be more vulnerable to a more serious foe in order to open up the Strait of Hormuz for oil, when we, in effect, as a energy exporter and creator, the United States is the world's leader. We should theoretically not need foreign oil. So why do we care about the Strait of Hormuz? But we got these cool goodies, right? We got this elite Marine unit. We got to use it. If we don't use it, we'll lose it or something. But that's Iran. I mean, like, we already declared victory there. It's done. It should be over, right? I mean, it's going to go as long as we need it to go until we can just keep declaring victory every single day. But maybe we will achieve victory in a couple of weeks and the Marines can go back to Japan, or they can go to Cuba, because I guess we're going to go to war there next. Back to the Oval Office. President had some remarks on this one.
When you say Cuba is next, is Cuba, whatever you do with the military there, it seems like something, will that look more like Iran or Venezuela?
Can't tell you that. I can tell you that they're talking to us. It's a failed nation. They have no money, they have no oil, they have no nothing. They have nice land. They have nice landscape, you know. It's a beautiful island.
So stay tuned for next week's episode of Trump's season. What is this? I guess we had a hiatus for 4 years. So we are in season 5 right now. Season 6, because we're in the second year of the Trump administration. Now I want to just do a mirror test. Let's imagine that for a moment Joe Biden had his mental faculties. Or actually, we probably don't need to go that far. Let's go to Barack Obama, the guy who launched Obamacare, right? The one that you hate. Like, it's visceral. Obama, like, me saying that name actually raises your blood temperature. Your blood pressure goes up thinking about the Barackalypse, right? The Obamageddon that he was. Hope and change. I hope I have some change after you blew out the budget. He spent way less than Donald Trump, by the way. Let's say Barack Obama said, you know, I really like Cuba. Let me be clear. I'm going to send Marines down to Cuba next. Would that pass muster? Government is always the worst solution to all of our problems. And it doesn't seem to matter who's actually there. And who's actually there is going to be contingent on this new act that's going through, that we're continuing to debate whether or not we should debate or have the debate about this Save America Act. So I want to talk about that a little bit and actually take it from the position of the Washington Post, because ultimately they're going to throw everything they can in order to prevent the American electoral system from being fair and transparent. Communists are on record, right? This SAVE Act was essentially says you got to be an American citizen and verify it in order to vote. It is far beyond an 80-20 issue, but for broad numbers, 80-20 issue, not controversial. Americans want to make sure that our elections are fair. And yet we can't seem to get it passed. We can't seem to debate whether or not we want to get it even passed in the Senate, because it's run by John Thune, and he doesn't want fair elections. He wants to make sure that Republicans get elected, and the Republicans that he prefers don't want to actually bring about the institutional changes to make government not the optimal solution, but at least a better solution to most of our problems than it currently is. Like, that's not his directive. He wants the status quo. But from the Washington Post perspective, they don't want it passed. How are they going to message this? Because it's an 80-20 issue. It is a good solution to the problem, or at least a better solution, not optimal, but better. Well, they can't argue against 80-20. So what are they going to do? They're going to say, hey, Republicans, we're really interested in you winning elections. Yeah, let's go to this one. So from the Washington Post, the voting bill Trump says will secure victory could backfire because the Washington Post is really concerned about elections going the way of the Republicans. So the case that's made is that, and we're going to get a little bit nerdy with numbers, 54% of districts, congressional districts, that the GOP currently has, or has, a stranglehold on, because very few districts are actually toss-ups. So a little more than half of the districts, 5% of those voters are going to have to re-register because there's a complication. Maybe it's a wife who changed her name. There's some sort of a problem. But 36% of the Democrat districts, only 5% of those folks are going to have to re-register. So a higher number of Republican districts are going to have 5% of their people have to go and re-register. So that is digging really, really deep into numbers in order to make this case. But then they go to some broad strokes about demographics, and they say that the Republicans at one time were really heavily in the suburbs. Remember, that was the George W. Bush soccer moms who were very concerned about terrorist attacks happening at soccer practice, so they voted for the Republicans. But now, increasingly, the Republican coalition is more rural, it's more male, it's more low education, and statistically, those people are going to have a hard time going and re-registering to vote or getting their ID to begin with. So as a result, if you extrapolate that all the way out, it looks like Texas and Georgia could be in play. So as a result, the Washington Post, for the good of the Republican Party, really advocates that they should not pass the Save America Act. That is a serious proposition that's put forward in a serious news publication. After all, democracy will die in darkness without the Washington Post. But ultimately, if that doesn't resonate with you, dear viewer on the AMRAD pod, they want to make sure that they call you a racist and a sexist, which is what they always fall back on at these outlets, these communist rags, because they say that 21 million Americans who lack easy access to proof of citizenship, the people that want to vote, they're disproportionately people of color. So you're a racist anyway. It doesn't matter, whatever you say. It just always goes back to that. Meteor to strike tomorrow, and women and people of color will be hurt worse. All right, let's pivot to some of the worst purveyors of racist politics, and let's talk about Jasmine Crockett, who she is not long for elected office, but I did see this come across my feed, and it's pretty disturbing. So police down in Dallas apparently shot a security guard who was working for Jasmine Crockett. Headline, USA.com. Headline, police fatally shoot Representative Jasmine Crockett's security guard. This guy, whose name is Diamond Robinson, he had an outstanding federal arrest warrant for impersonating law enforcement. He identified himself as a detective with the U.S. Capitol Police and drove a replica undercover police vehicle using license plates he'd stolen from cars at a military recruiting office. The police approached him. He barricaded himself inside of his vehicle in this parking lot. They tried to lob some smoke grenades. And then he pops out of the vehicle with a gun in hand, so they smoke him. That's a justifiable use of deadly force. Having a gun pointing at police officers presents an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury to the officers. Every single use of force policy from every single law enforcement agency, to include ones from communist enclaves like New York or Illinois or California, will justify that shooting. And actually, there was a video to prove that this guy was working on Jasmine Crockett's security. I think it's a quick one. Let's just give this a play to give you the visual evidence when she was running for Senate in the primary. This is this guy, Diamond.
These images of Mike King standing close to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett shows how trusted he was as part of her security detail while she's been in office and while on the campaign trail during her recent run for a U.S. Senate seat. Multiple law enforcement sources say King was the man shot and killed after a standoff with Dallas police SWAT officers on Wednesday night. Police say he was chased into a hospital parking garage where he barricaded himself inside a vehicle before he was forced out by tear gas and pulled a gun on officers.
And they said Mike King because he was using a fake name, his actual name, Diamond Robinson. And Jasmine Crockett's campaign responded in typical Jasmine Crockett way. And I'll just throw it up there. A little bit difficult to read, but just the high points of it. She said, the fact that an individual is able to somehow circumvent the vetting process for something as sensitive as security for members of Congress highlights the loopholes and shortcomings in many of our systems. We've been unable to locate any violent offenses, though, like thoughts and prayers for the dude and his family who pulled a gun on officers. But she did make a good point, or at least not her campaign. The many loopholes in the ability of this guy to circumvent the vetting process. Oh, so you mean the government vetting process for your security, dear Congresswoman? It wasn't efficient. It was suboptimal at best because government is always the worst solution for every single challenge, difficulty, and complication and problem. You couldn't vet this guy? Huh. I guess you proved my point today, didn't you? Now, she's not in office, Jasmine Crockett, for very much longer. Let's talk about another communist, though, who is seeking to get into office to supplant a communist, and that's out of Minnesota. So from the New York Times, headline, ICE lawyer who told judge she was overwhelmed seeks a new role, lawmaker. Oh, wow. Wow, they just always got to stay in control. So during a hearing in federal court in St. Paul, this woman, her name is Julie Lee, she's Vietnamese extraction, I believe, said she wished that a judge would hold her in contempt to send her to jail so that, quote, I can have a full 24 hours of sleep. The system sucks. This job sucks. That made her sort of famous in communist circles. So naturally, they said, we want to run you for Congress. But she lives in Ilhan Omar's district. So now we have a one communist versus a number of communists. Royal Rumble style, they're going to go after it and see what happens. But she said originally this Lee, what's her first name again? Julie. Yeah. She said that she began working in immigration to get an understanding of what was going on, to see how it operated. And she wanted to help find ways to enforce the law, but in an even-handed way, because she's a communist. And that's what communists do. They find places of power to get elected to or appointed to. In this case, she was appointed to be an immigration attorney. And now she wants to get elected to be a congresswoman from the Ilhan Omar district that represents Hennepin County area, Minneapolis, St. Paul, because she wants to even-handedly apply the law to immigration. No, she wants to have amnesty for illegal aliens. She doesn't want to eject 30, 40, 50 million illegal aliens. The mandate that was sent a little over a year ago when the American people went to the polls and voted for the president who said, I will give you mass deportations, just install me and I will use the government, the worst tool for all of our problems in order to do it. And shockingly, it hasn't followed through. We haven't seen the mass deportations, and I don't think we will. And I don't think that certainly if you elect this Julie Lee, or maybe she gets pushed aside and they re-elect Ilhan Omar. No, the people of that district don't want that. They're going to elect someone who's going to obstruct that process from happening. And because those sorts of people, the Ilhan Omars, or maybe the Julie Lees, get into power, they obstruct, they prevent, and even if they didn't, the government itself would not be able to do it. They can't do the simple charges that we expect of them, that we demand of them, because they aren't incentivized to do it. They're incentivized to do other things. They're incentivized to always say yes, never say no, create systems that invite corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse so that they can stand up task forces. And that's the last piece I want to get to, or the second to last piece that I want to get to, because the president was very excited to announce in the Oval Office that they are standing up an anti-fraud task force. J.D. Vance is going to be at the helm. There are 4 classes of people, and I've itemized them before, but I will re-itemize them. Why do we have these systems like welfare. Why do we have them? Well, you have the recipients. When you have the recipients, they become addicted to that sweet, sweet government cash. That's a permanent voter block. You have the organizations that dole out the money. They might be government in nature, they might be nonprofit, NGO, but they're nice landing places for people in government to go and get a lucrative job, or they're just a way to launder money back to the politicians. Hey, kick us out this grant and we'll be sure to fund your campaign, Senator. Or we'll claim that we're going to do the thing that we say we do, but really it's a get out the vote effort for you, Senator. Kick us that money. Then you have the politicos, the talking heads, the people that like to go on TV and say, we're going to fix this problem. We can't believe about this waste, fraud, and abuse. It's lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my, we're certainly going to address it. And how are we going to address it? With a task force. We're going to create the pose of legitimate reason to have government, because one of the charges of government in our social compact is to protect us against fraud and force. So it's a government jobs program. It's a make work program. It's to create the illusion that we're really doing something. So the White House put out this announcement. They're establishing the task force to eliminate fraud. I mean, that's a pretty ambitious task here, but I think J.D. Vance is a pretty squared away guy. He's going to be at the helm. Quote we got from the president was, quote, it's pretty big in Minnesota, $19 billion, but that's only for one aspect of the fraud. In California, they say it's 10 times worse. They're talking about the child care fraud, the Medicare fraud, the Somali fraud that everybody forgot about, and it was only like 6-7 weeks ago. And then we got another quote from our vice president. One of the things that even before this executive order was signed that we were able to see was evidence that in Minneapolis, there were primarily illegal immigrants. J.D. Vance, they're called illegal aliens. But those illegal immigrants who were defrauding a Medicaid program that was meant to go to autistic children. You had autistic kids in Minneapolis. They were literally stealing out of their pocket. All right, now I need to quibble with our vice president. One, they weren't literally stealing. It wasn't in literature. They were actually stealing. But what were they stealing? They were stealing government bennies. Government bennies that are not itemized in our pesky, dusty documents. So your presupposition is that these fraudsters were stealing things that shouldn't have been going out to begin with. Honestly, why do we need an anti-fraud task force? We could just eliminate the fraud tomorrow. We could eliminate the fraud today. We just eliminate the program. If you don't have a program, there's nothing to be fraudulent about. We don't need the program because it's not part of your job. You're a hammer in search of a nail. You're saying, I'm a government. I got to give out the bennies. I got to make sure that I get a permanent voter block. And then I got to get a make work product in here. I'm going to find myself a hammer and I'm going to whack some nails. And then if there's no nails, I'll put some holes in the wall. And then in order to put the drywall up to make sure that nobody can pay attention to those holes in there, I'll get a task force on that. They'll put the drywall, they'll put some paint on there, and nobody will ever know. It'll cost us billions of dollars in order to reclaim the billions of dollars, and we'll never actually reclaim the billions of dollars, but at least we did something. We're doing something. We have a task force. And the last thing I want to say about this is, why do we need a task force to address fraud? We have a robust, preeminent law enforcement agency that gets $11 billion, and they are supposed to investigate fraud, and that's the FBI. I think it's really interesting that the FBI isn't part of this anti-fraud task force. It kind of shows the confidence that the president has in the FBI and leadership at the FBI, which was really excited to have a state-of-the-art gym I saw online that Kash Patel was announcing that they have a next-gen thing going on. Bro, you built a brand new gym and you think that's next-gen? It's going to have things in there for people to exercise and recover. So what do you have, cold plunges for new agents now? Give me a break. Another thing I wanted to say about their current director of the FBI, because it always seems to go back to Kash. is this last piece I want to get to as we're talking about being the worst solution. This was put out on Twitter/X by the FBI director, and he talks about how that they have interdicted all these terrorist attacks, and most of them are not legitimate. And that's a conversation for another day. But I want to hone in on one last portion. And here's the quote from the FBI director. The FBI in 2025 made 707 CT arrests, that means counterterrorism, and had 640 successful disruptions of planned terror attacks. 640 disruptions. Well, when you hear the word disruption because you speak English, you think that that means something. It doesn't mean that. Let me illuminate you. A disruption, if you speak English, means that they stopped the attack from happening, right? 640 times, just mathematically, just that would mean almost 2 a day. They don't work weekends, guys. So it's like 2 a day. Do you think that the FBI stopped 2 terrorist attacks from happening every single day in 2025 under the great leadership of Kash Patel? No, no. The reason that they can claim that they got 640 disruptions is that disruption is not what you think it is. It's an actual statistical accomplishment. There's a quota. They have to achieve disruptions. And what are disruptions? It means they got an arrest. Anytime that they arrest somebody, they claim that they disrupted something. It could be an arrest of a complex case where you're working at a drug group that they're out there slinging dope, and then you wind up arresting one of the members of the drug gang. That's a disruption because today, I guess, they're not going to be able to sling dope because that guy isn't there. Now, if you want to get into the nitty gritty away from the terrorism angle, disruptions apply across the board. I worked only financial crime case that I did on an Indian reservation in 7 years. It involved 9 tribal council members who were embezzling money from the casino and putting it into their pockets. It was like $300,000 total. About 30 grand were going to each one of these members over the course of like about a year. And it was a nice pop. Typically, that amount of money would not be taken by a United States Attorney's Office, but it happened on an Indian reservation, so they were happy to take it. And I guess you could characterize it as a career case, right? They didn't go to jail. They were convicted. They wound up being sentenced to a point where they couldn't serve on the tribal council anymore. But when I had the summons in hand to give to these members of the tribal council, it was technically going to count as an arrest. And I was anxious to go out there. Let me just serve these summons. Hey, you got to report to court here coming up. You've been investigated and indicted, and now it's time for the hammer of justice to come down, the hammer in search of a nail. And I was told, hey, Steve, you don't want to do that. You want to go to one person on Monday and another person on Tuesday and a third person on Wednesday, et cetera, et cetera. Well, why would I want to do it that way? Well, this is a criminal enterprise, and by policy, you can only claim 1 disruption per calendar day. So if you were to serve all 9 individuals on Monday, that's great, awesome job, but you can only claim 1 disruption. But if you serve 1 on Monday, 1 on Tuesday, 1 on Wednesday, then you can claim a disruption every single day. And we can get 9 disruptions instead of 1, Steve. Why work smarter? Why work harder? We can work smarter. It's all a game. It's all a manipulation at the end, because the government is always the worst solution to all of our problems. All right. We've reached the end of the AMRAD pod for this Thursday, but I'm not going to leave you without a fun palate cleanse. Nothing to do with the hammer in search of a nail, the worst solution. I just like to make you feel old, AMRADs, because I've seen the comments, I've seen the chat, and you all don't like it. So I'm just going to rub on it and dig on it until that whole area gets callous. I'm going to toughen you all up. So here is a nice video of Miss Sherry Lewis. Remember Sherry Lewis in the Lamb Chop program? Guys, that show was off the air over 30 years ago. Who used to watch that one? I did. So here's Sherry Lewis. the ventriloquist talking to you through a sock.
And hi. Lamb chop. Excuse me, lamb chop. Hello. Hello. What's the matter?
What's that?
What's what?
That thing.
What thing? Oh, that thing.
Yeah, that thing.
That's a camera.
A camera?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Lamb chop.
Just a second.
Lamb chop.
I'm posing.
I know you're posing. You don't have to pose.
Why not?
'Cause these are moving pictures.
Moving pictures?
Uh-huh. What are you doing?
I'm moving.
All right, guys, we'll be back with you tomorrow, noontime as always. And until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.